All right, it's a few seconds after 4:00 p.m. on April 27th, and we're here to conduct a special meeting of the ACWD Board of Directors. And I would ask the secretary to please take the roll call.
Directors Gunther,
Here.
Akbari,
Here.
Huang, here, Weed, and Sethy.
Here. And Director Gunther, would you certainly, yes, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right, got it. So at this time, we will take public comments on matters that are on this notice of the special meeting. And if you would like to speak, please do, whether you're in the audience or online. And we welcome your comments.
And just for the board's information, we do see a member of staff online participating right now as a member of the public, but I'll go ahead and read through the housekeeping remarks and see if we get anybody else joining us. Good afternoon. On behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this special meeting of the ACWD Board. My name is Ed Stevenson, and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public participating in person may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda and all related materials are available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This hybrid meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. Toward the end of the meeting, the board will convene privately into closed session. Members of the public may remain online or in the boardroom in order to be informed of board reports once the closed session is concluded. And that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Okay, we have no consent items on the meeting calendar for today. We have one action item for item 4.1. And I'll turn it over to staff to give us the background on this.
Okay, item 4.1 is authorization of agreement for procurement of vertical turbine pumps and motors for the groundwater PFAS treatment facility phase 1. And I'll turn it over to our Director of Engineering and Technology to introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, board members, staff and community members. This is an item that has to do with the PFAS treatment project that we've commissioned a while back. PFAS, as you know, is an emerging contaminant, and the district has proactively started a project. And one of the items needed for that project is the pre-purchase of pumps, motors, and other equipment. I will read the summary of this staff report as well as the recommendation, and I'll take any questions or comments the board may have. The groundwater PFAS treatment facility project consists of an ion exchange treatment system to remove PFAS from groundwater. An invitation for bids for vertical turbine pumps and motors was advertised on January 31st, 2023. 2 bids were received and evaluated, and the board rejected the 2 bids at the March 21st, 2023 meeting. Special board meeting at the March 21st, 2023. Therefore, in accordance with the district procurement policy, staff negotiated an agreement for the procurement of vertical turbine pumps and motors with the apparent low bidder, FlowServe US Inc. of Taneytown, Maryland, with terms acceptable to the district. There's adequate funding in the adopted capital improvement program budget for this expenditure. This procurement was most recently reviewed with the board of directors on March 21st, 2023. Board authorization of this agreement will help meet the district's strategic goal 1.2, continue to meet water quality standards 100% of the time. So staff's recommendation is by motion authorize the general manager to enter into an agreement for the procurement of vertical turbine pumps and motors in support of the groundwater PFAS treatment facility project phase 1 to FlowServe US Inc. in the amount of $708,303, and the job number is 10119. Thank you.
So I will first open it up to the public if there's any comments on this action item. Seeing none, I will turn it over to the board. Whoever wants to speak first. Director Weed? Okay, I have one question, which is related to the long lead time on procuring these products. So what do we anticipate as in terms of scheduled delivery? Wasn't really included in the write-up here.
Correct. So once we place the order, we will have definitive timeline of delivery. Right now, these items are running 6 to 9 months out. So that's why we're, kind of rushing to get the order in. But we should be able to get the pumps at a time when the construction will be ready to install those pumps. So I would say within 6 to 9 months, we'll have delivery of the pumps.
Is there any incentive in the contract agreement for expediting an early delivery?
We do not have an incentive for early delivery. We do have some liquidated damages for delayed delivery or insufficient delivery, but we do not have incentives for expedited delivery.
Okay. All right, well, I hope we have it before the end of our next fiscal year.
Oh, definitely. It will be
All right.
before that.
So if there are no other board comments, I will ask the board secretary to.
I'll need a motion.
I'll move staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Sorry about that.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Huang, aye, Weed,
Aye.
and Sethy.
Aye. Okay, at this time, we will. See. We will move on to our water resources planning workshop. And again, I will turn it over to staff to cover what we're going to do during this workshop.
Okay, thanks very much. And Director of Water Resources, Ms. Laura Heides, will get us started here too.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good afternoon, members of the board, public and staff. Thank you for joining today's Water Resources Planning Workshop. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the staff we have here in support of today's presentations, including Leonard Ash and Thomas Nizer here in the room, and Devin Becker and Kelsey Oshiro, who will be joining us online from the Water Supply and Planning team, and Michelle Walden here in the room from the Groundwater Resources team. I would note we don't have any members of the public here now, but should they walk in, we have handouts in the back if they wish to follow along. Next slide, please. Slide. Great.
I should have noted earlier Director Weed's attendance just a few minutes after 4.
Yeah, I had him coming in the room at 4:04 p.m. Didn't miss too much.
Great. So the current Water Resources Planning Workshop series is focused on planning for long-term management of the district's water resources as we face a number of future pressures and changes. Tonight's workshop is intended to update the board on current activities that will inform some of our long-term water supply planning efforts. Next slide, please. Previous workshops and presentations in this series have covered a variety of topics as shown on this slide, and today is workshop number 4. Next slide, please. We will be covering a number of topics tonight, including the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Project, the district's annual water supply and demand assessment, an update on the flows program, and some brief touch points on the district's climate adaptation plan public summary document and the naming of the integrated resources planning document. And on the next slide, number 6 includes a list of acronyms you may hear today for quick reference as needed. And to cover our first topic tonight on the Los Vaqueros project, I'm pleased to turn it over to my colleague, John Wunderlich, Director of Finance and Administration, and the district's alternate to the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Powers Authority. So.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Heides. Good evening or good afternoon, members of the board, staff, and public. I'm pleased to be able to speak with you about this project and provide some updates on where we're at. So, but if we can go to the next slide. Maybe we'll go one more slide. So we're looking at a graphic a little bit while I talk through it. But basically, the Los Vaqueros Reservoir is an off-stream reservoir owned and operated by the Contra Costa Water District. It currently holds 160,000 acre feet of water. And essentially what the project is it's proposing to increase the size of the reservoir from 160,000 acre feet to 275,000 acre feet. The district is one of several partners who are participating in this project. And essentially the way it would work is that partners would use Contra Costa's existing conveyance system, as well as in some circumstances, East Bay Municipal Utility District's existing conveyance system to take water and put it into the reservoir and then also take it delivered. The two major components of the project are, of course, the increase in the reservoir size, increasing the dam height to store more water. The second major component of the project is a new conveyance facility, the Transfer Bethany pipeline, that would take water from the reservoir, and it's represented in kind of the green arrow on the graphic here, down toward the California Aqueduct right above the Bethany Reservoir, but below the Banks pumping plant, which is critical because then the ability to use that would not be governed by restrictions at the Banks pumping plant. And the way this specifically helps the district is outlined here is that it's south of the Delta. And so, you know, it provides a way to have water that if there's any kind of limitations in the Delta that we can still take through that Transfer Bethany pipeline. It also through the Contra Costa Water District's various intakes and East Bay Mud System provides different avenues to take conveyance of water to get it into storage. You know, provides us the ability to store surpluses. This year's a great example. If we had this project now, this would be a great year to be able to take surpluses and get them stored in there. When we have a first dry year, so if we could think back to a few years ago in our first dry year from the recent drought, it would provide us flexibility to do things like take water from semi-tropic back earlier and stage it there and have it readily available. So it would provide a lot of operational flexibility to the district. And then because there are so many partners, we're looking at 8 partners within this project, potentially will facilitate transfers of water between all of those partners through that reservoir, you know, in ways that operationally we can't really make work today. So it's a great regional project that provides a lot of opportunities. Next slide. And so what we've done is we've formalized that governance of the project with those other partners. About 1.5 years ago, a joint powers authority was created and it meets monthly. Of course, Board President Sethy is the district's representative to that JPA. The JPA also has committees that are evaluating key issues for the formation of the project. And the district is represented on 2 of those committees. Director Sethy also serves as the treasurer of the JPA and is on the finance committee. And I represent the district on the operations and engineering committee. Last year, Taryn Ravizini was appointed as the executive director. She's a consultant to the JPA. The JPA itself does not have any direct employees. And the JPA is currently in the process of really staffing up the support for Taryn in her role as executive director. And in particular, we're looking for some program management consultants to come on board soon that will provide a lot of expertise and support for the engineering and operational aspects of the project, and specifically in overseeing the work done by Contra Costa Water District. And then where I'm going to focus most of today's discussion of the Los Vaqueros project is in all these different agreements and contracts essentially that are being developed, because before anybody's willing to go and spend big money on developing this is in excess of $1 billion project. You're going to want to know that you understand the rules of the project and what your responsibilities are going to be and what your eventual benefits will be. And that's all got to be laid out before people will really commit that kind of money. And so that's really where the focus is on negotiating those aspects. And so there are multiple working groups with staff and attorneys from all the member agencies that are meeting regularly to develop all these agreements and really get us into a position where we can understand what the rules of the project will be. And as Alameda County Water District, we can really evaluate the costs and benefits of the project for us and then make that ultimate final decision about whether we want to commit ourselves to participating. At this point, just to be clear, the district has made no permanent commitment to participate in this project and is actually obligated to no further expenditures. If we decided we didn't want to participate, we could be done. We would have lost all the investments we made in the past, but we wouldn't need to make any future contributions. Let's go to the next slide. So on the next couple of slides, I'll review some of the key agreements. First is the service agreement. And I put this first, not because it comes first, but because it's the one you hear us talk about the most as really the key agreement that binds you to participating in the project. Once you sign on the dotted line for a service agreement, you're really committed to funding your share of the project, unless all the other JPA members will let you out of that obligation, or you're able to find some other agency who will buy you out. I would guess, though, the other members wouldn't want to just on their own pick up our cost share, right? So if we sign that service agreement, it's really a serious commitment. And what that service agreement will outline is not only our costs, but also the benefits that will be provided to us, the services that will be provided to us by the JPA. So it will spell out we're getting, X amount of acre feet of storage capacity dedicated to us. We have these operating rules to use the conveyance facilities and so on. Next, I'll get through some of the key agreements that need to be executed before the service agreement. So next is the contracts for administration of public benefits. And I guess just to back up slightly, the service agreement is between the JPA and ACWD, between the JPA and each individual member. So potentially there are 8 different service agreements, one for each member of the JPA with the member. The contract for administration of public benefits will be between the JPA and state and federal funding partners. So for example, between the JPA and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, or between the JPA and the US Bureau of Reclamation. And what they'll do is they'll stipulate, hey, as a state, we're investing $477 million of Prop 1 funds. This is what we expect in return for our investment. This is how you're going to provide those public benefits, which include urban water supply benefits, include emergency storage benefits, but most significantly in terms of the state investment include ecosystem benefits. And so here is how kind of the expectation we have for the amount of kind of capacity in this project that we're buying for the refuges, particularly represented by Grasslands Water District on the JPA, and how you're going to support habitat. So of course, we need to understand those rules before we can understand our final cost shares and get to a service agreement. So that will have to come before a service agreement. Next is a facility usage agreement. There will be 2 of those, one between the JPA and Contra Costa Water District, and one between the JPA and East Bay Municipal Utility District. We are going to make use of their existing facilities to maximize the value of this project, right? We're not building new intakes and pipelines to take water from the Delta into Los Vaqueros Reservoir. We're using those facilities that already exist. And if we, ACWD, were the ones who own this reservoir and that system, we would expect partners to provide us with some level of compensation for use of those facilities in the project. So similarly, Contra Costa and East Bay Mud, they do expect some level of compensation for use of their facilities. That's something we've been negotiating and are working toward. And so what these agreements will spell out is not only the compensation they receive when we use their facilities, but also the kind of guarantee or the level of service they are offering to the JPA to use their facilities in terms of whenever it's not fully subscribed for their own operations or other, kind of perhaps permitting agency restrictions or water quality concerns, that they will maximize the beneficial use of their facilities for us within the project. And so that's the facility usage agreements. There are also agreements with DWR that need to get executed to first facilitate connection of the Transfer Bethany pipeline into the California Aqueduct. And then also how this project is going to operate in coordination with the State Water Project. The turn-in agreement for Transfer Bethany pipeline into the State Aqueduct, of course, will have to come before the service agreement, but there may be other aspects of agreements in terms of how our operations for Los Vaqueros are coordinated with the overall State Water Project. There may be aspects of that that come after the service agreements. Okay, a lot of agreements we're working on. So the next one, and this one is probably the one that's most active right now within JPA members, is the Contra Costa Water District Design and Construction Agreement. As the owner and operator of the Los Vaqueros system, Contra Costa is the one who's going to take the lead on the design and construction of the expansion to the reservoir and the other facilities that are enhancing or connecting into their system. And so what this agreement will do is specify the relationship between them and the JPA in that work. It will establish what sort of oversight or say we'll have in what they're doing, their ability to essentially make decisions and take actions within the framework that's set within this agreement. Because again, the JPA is the one funding all of this. And this one, I think we want to get done relatively quickly, even though big money expenditures will not come until after the service agreements are done. There is already preliminary permitting, environmental design work and things that are happening with the contributions made to date, as well as the early funding available from the state and Bureau of Reclamation. And so this will kind of formalize those arrangements and oversight for the JPA of the work that they're doing. The next one, and again, that's between the JPA and CCWD. There would potentially be a similar agreement between between the JPA and East Bay Mud for any facilities they need to modify because of the project. The next one is only between CCWD and East Bay Mud. That backstop agreement, the JPA is not involved in this agreement, so ACWD is not directly or indirectly involved in this agreement, but it is a prerequisite for the service agreements, because as part of constructing the expansion to the dam, it will have to be drained. And that means CCWD will be operating without a very key facility that it has for several years. And so they're not going to be willing to move forward with the project unless they have assurances that they have some way to kind of make up for that. And that's this agreement with East Bay Mud that would provide them with that operational assurance. We'll also be having operations and maintenance agreements between, again, the JPA and CCWD and the JPA and East Bay Mud that will establish kind of the operating protocols and priorities between those groups as we come to operate the system. And again, we would expect at a certain level that to be defined before we sign a service agreement, so we know what we're getting into. Of course, many of these agreements are potentially subject to continued evaluation by the JPA and refinement over time, but we would just want to have a basic understanding of what the operations will look like before we sign a service agreement. And then the last one here, the funding agreements, again, between the JPA and the two funding agencies, and then also between the JPA and the Environmental Protection Agency, because we're pursuing a WIFIA loan. We have been invited to apply, so it does look very favorable that we'll receive that loan. And we would expect all of these agreements to come very quickly after the service agreements, because it's signing the service agreements that signals to the state Bureau of Reclamation that we're doing this project. We have the local cost share. That's when they'll begin to disperse or make available the full amount of allocated funds. And so that will move very quickly. And then as far as the WIFIA loan, we need the service agreement signed for the JPA to really be credit worthy to be able to get a WIFIA loan. But again, once all that's signed, it could be within a couple of months that all of those funding agreements are finalized. Okay, so in terms of where we're at, I mentioned we're very active on the design and construction agreement. We're also very actively working on the service agreements. Three things that are really big focal points that we're discussing right now are going through various subgroups, specifically the allocation of storage capacity. A very significant issue within the project right now because the project is only proposing to add 115,000 acre feet of capacity, and there's currently 170,000 acre feet of JPA member requests. So that's going to be a process we'll have to work through and see how that works out in terms of what each member can get relative to their request. So it's good news in terms of the viability of the project. There seems to be very limited risk of people walking away and the project no longer being viable because there aren't partners. But again, a challenge here in terms of trying to get the total amount down to the 115,000 acre feet. Also working on a conveyance subgroup in terms of how the costs will be shared for the various conveyance facilities, what sort of priorities there will be to capacity in the conveyance systems and those types of issues. And then it hasn't been formed yet, but it's been recommended to create an operations subgroup to kind of get into a number of the operational issues that need to be worked out, because if we don't all understand how the project's going to operate, we can't really figure out how much water supply benefit we can expect to get from it. And so there are some issues there that need to be worked out. As I referenced before, we've made prior contributions. Those are made. Those are kind of sunk costs in the project. They get us through June 30th of this year. The board will see another request for a multi-party cost share agreement, and that would cover the next fiscal year. And the estimated cost of that is just a little over 1.2 million for ACWD. Those costs will be included in the draft district budget for next fiscal year that will be presented at the budget workshop in a few weeks. So in terms of the schedule, in June of this year, we're expecting, so we're already working on iteration 2 of a service agreement term sheet within the staff working group. So we're expecting to get version 3 over the summer is when a lot of these CCWD and East Bay Mud agreements, so facility usage agreements, operations and maintenance agreements, a lot of those agreements that are between CCWD and the JPA, we should have drafts of those this summer. And then kind of work through some iterations and have updates again in October and December of all these various agreements. And then, you know, kind of the timeline then is to have kind of near final versions by the end of this calendar year, and then come early next calendar year in 2024 to look at ACWD potentially executing the service agreement. And this is an update. The prior schedule was more aggressive than this. Based on all these agreements I've described and how many parties are involved, I think even this schedule is still optimistic in terms of reaching agreement with all these parties. So again, this is the current schedule, but subject to change. You've got a lot of partners involved and a lot of moving pieces. But again, major capital investments will not start until all these agreements are in place. And so you may be thinking, okay, that's great. How are you going to keep us informed and provide a forum for our feedback as the district's board of directors for you to go and take back? And so we do have a tentative schedule. Of course, this is really subject to change based on the timing and progress of all those different agreements. So of course, you're getting that update today at today's workshop. There will be a meeting of the partner agency general managers at the Aqua conference in May. And so you'll get a GM report on that at the regular board meeting in May. But then the next major update we're planning to bring to the board would be on June 8th. So this would be at the same time as we're asking you to adopt the budget for next year and approve the multi-party amendment. And so that would be June 8th, and we would bring an updated business case at that time. I'm not sure how significantly the business case will have updated by then compared to what we last presented to the board. I'm not sure if we'll be far enough along in negotiating some of these agreements, but again, we will bring an update of the business case in June. We get to some kind of first rounds of some of these various agreements over the summer. And so we're not necessarily expecting a lot until we can kind of get through some time of reviewing and rounds, but essentially starting in September through basically the rest of the year, we're planning regular check-ins with the Water Resources Committee, or potentially also adding this as a topic at a planned Water Resources Workshop in September. So that the frequent touch points with the board and the Water Resources Committee will really start in September. And as we kind of build and prepare towards those service agreements. And then again, kind of coming again with more project updates and updated business cases to the full board early next year. And so that's the current kind of plan and schedule and status of the Los Vaqueros project. I think now may be an appropriate time to just stop for some board discussion on this project or any questions you might have.
Let me see if there's any member of the public that would like to offer some input here. I'm not seeing any, so we will turn it over to the board. And
Okay.
anyone who wants to start first.
Let me begin. I'm probably the naysayer here. The Valley Water staff told their board, the Water Supply Exploratory Committee, that they had three options for participation. One was the Bethany Transfer Pipeline only. Second was the Bethany Transfer Pipeline and limited operational support of the reservoir, or full participation and dedicated storage in the reservoir. Those three options were not presented to this board. When I asked about them, I got a blank stare. What is the status of those three options?
Yes, I think, and I will defer to Mr. Nizer and Ms. Heides, who are water resources experts in terms of the relative value of those different options. From the JPA's perspective, I haven't heard anything from the JPA that says, you must be in on every element of the project. But from our own operations and how we can maximize the value of our participation, we really need the storage and conveyance together. And so, for example, if we were just taking water delivered, right? All that we would get by having Transfer Bethany participation only is another conveyance option in the event that Banks is not functional. That's kind of what it would provide. So the real value of Transfer Bethany for us is really the ability to take water stored in the reservoir and bring it down through that mechanism. But I'll turn and look at Mr. Nizer or Ms. Heides if they'd like to add any to that.
I think you summed it up. The storage is a critical piece to be able to exercise and make maximum use of the project. And I would invite Mr. Nizer to add any other flavor as well.
Okay, well, I would argue that with Antioch being yet another potential supplier to the Bethany Transfer Pipeline, that there are additional flexibilities available and that full participation and dedicated storage comes at an extraordinary cost. And is need not, since if you can have operational storage at a much lower cost. Next, my understanding that Contra Costa is not participating in the cost of raising the dam LV3 because they don't need the additional storage, and they will not be participating in the construction of the Bethany Transfer Pipeline because they do not benefit from the outflow of the Bethany Transfer Pipeline to the, and yet they will have operational veto power over the operation of those facilities.
So that's correct that they are not participating in the cost of those two elements of the project. That part is true. In terms of operational control, the reservoir is their core, part of their core system for serving their customers. And they will have, if they can demonstrate that their operations are materially harmed, they will have the ability to exercise control over the operations at the reservoir. In terms of Transfer Bethany pipeline, again, because they are not a part of that and that's doesn't connect with their system in any way, they're not really going to have an ability to demonstrate harm by use of the pipeline. So I don't really see them having the same control that you're kind of alluding to as it relates to the pipeline. And the pipeline, we do expect to be deeded over to the JPA at the conclusion of construction.
Okay, I would encourage you to review the documents on the draft documents on their having they and East Bay Mud having veto power over the operation of the entirety of the process of the infrastructure.
Yeah,
including
no,
the
it's
transfer pipeline.
they do have some broad veto power, but they can only exercise it within the context of being able to demonstrate a material harm to their operations. And so I'm not meaning to kind of disagree with what's written in the agreement. I'm just saying from a practical perspective, I don't see where they're going to be able to demonstrate material harm through the operation of the Transfer Bethany pipeline.
Okay.
But certainly the reservoir itself, you know, a very common situation might be, you know, we would want to bring water in from the Delta into the reservoir. Maybe at that particular moment in time, the water quality of the Delta doesn't meet their standards in terms of their own internal standards for water put into the reservoir. So they may say, now's not a time we can let you bring it in, because once the water goes into the reservoir, it's kind of blended and it's going to affect the water quality we can deliver to our customers.
Even though they claim they don't need the additional storage. Next, it's understanding that we have an understanding that we will reimburse them for 40% of their original cost of building the first two stages of LV 1 and 2, adjusted for inflation, which will almost triple the amount of their cost will be reimbursed to them by the other participants.
Yeah, so those of us participating in this expansion project benefit significantly from the existing facility. We don't have to build a new foundation. We don't have to buy land and a number of other facilities that we would have to pay for and construct ourselves if we were, say, a different project working from scratch. And so we are in the process of negotiating what level of reimbursement will be provided for those previous investments. So I would say it's preliminary to assign a specific percentage value because that's an ongoing negotiation, and that will be a part of the facility usage agreements.
That reimbursement will also include the watershed, the cost of their purchasing their watershed, and a much higher percentage for the additional land that will be impacted by the raised elevation of the reservoir.
Yeah, so again, the land that they purchased in terms of constructing the reservoir and protecting the watershed that would potentially drain into it, that was a cost to them. It's land we don't have to buy as the JPA because they already own it. So yes, some measure of the value of that land is a part of what they're asking for. But again, that continues to be negotiated, what that should look like.
Okay, that the original cost estimate of under $900 million has been somewhat arbitrarily raised to 1.4 million in order to qualify for a higher WIFIA loan. Is that true?
I mean, I don't think I would say arbitrarily, but the cost estimates based on some updated escalation factors have been revised. And so there is a basis for those revised estimates. And those estimates of the total project cost do feed into the maximum amount of WIFIA loan we can qualify for. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how big of a WIFIA loan we can qualify for. The WIFIA loan can't pay for more than 49% of the project.
Okay. Next, there's been discussion of having a larger Bethany transfer pipeline diameter. That there's been pushback on the part of Contra Costa on that for fear that some of the water might go to Southern California. How do we stand on the discussions of a larger than 8-foot diameter pipeline, 300 CFS, when you have a pumping station being designed for 450 CFS?
Yeah, so I would be curious to understand perhaps where that's coming from, within the JPA itself, there have been no discussions of changing the size of the pipeline. I'm not aware that there's any consideration of changing the size of the pipeline. I can confirm that in terms of CCWD's principles that have gone through voter referendums within their service area as it relates to an expansion of the reservoir, there are concerns about export of the water to various parts of the state, and certainly where the project stands now is that any kind of transfer of water by partners of Los Vaqueros Water, any kind of selling your capacity or kind of subscribing your capacity to other partners is supposed to be only for partners within the existing service area of the project, which includes the Bay Area and Central Valley.
Okay. And Contra Costa rejected a request for participation by an irrigation district located in the Tulare Basin because they were too far south.
I'm not familiar with that. I can't say that's not true, but I'm just not familiar with that.
What are you specifically referring to?
There was a request by an irrigation district located in the Tulare Basin to become part of the JPA, and they were rejected by Contra Costa for participation.
And who is that?
That was several years ago.
Who is that specifically?
I will have to give you the name, and I can give you the reference to my source again after the meeting.
Yeah, again, I'm not familiar with that. We've got the 8 founding members of the JPA. For the year and a half the JPA has been in existence, no other agency has made a request to join the JPA.
No, but this was prior to the creation of the JPA.
I don't recall this subject ever coming up, Director Weed. And I would add that the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority is composed of 29 different entities within a 19-member board. And it extends all the way deep down into the Central Valley, including Westlands, the largest water district in the state,
I agree.
larger than the state of
Yes.
Rhode Island.
And might they be interested in a larger Bethany transfer pipeline?
They have made no proposals for a larger pipeline within any of the meetings of the JPA. Nor have I heard a proposal from them in any non-public staff meetings.
No, unless I'll allow Director Sethy to clarify whatever he wishes.
I would really like to know who that agency was.
All right, I'll get that for you. There was another item that came out in discussions early on. There's a proposal originally to provide additional mitigation by improving Vasco Road, which is a very dangerous roadway. There was opposition by members of the environmental community, I'm told, because it might encourage additional development and growth in the Brentwood Discovery Bay area. As a result, that proposal was removed from the list of mitigation projects. And in order to avoid challenges on the environmental challenge of the Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion. So I am not a fan. I am a strong supporter of the Bethany Transfer Pipeline, an even stronger supporter to an enlarged pipeline. And believe that Antioch could be yet another party that could provide intakes and water supply to that pipeline. And Antioch and Contra Costa have had a somewhat tenuous relationship over the years. Although they finally did have someone elected to their board from Antioch in the last election. So that's my comment. Thank you.
May I?
Yes, please, Director Huang.
So I think having the Los Vaqueros project would definitely provide operational flexibility for the water district. The additional, I think this really wet winter demonstrate the potential benefits to the district for having a local supply storage. However, I have always said if it doesn't make business sense to the district, then we will not execute the project. So what I'm going to say is I look forward to the business case review and see how the number spins up.
Look, if I could add real quickly, my understanding is we put nearly $100 million in our CIP for this project for the ACWD contribution.
Yeah, so getting back to the business case, staff is in full agreement. We're going to do the business case. The last time we looked at a business case, it did look favorable for participation, which is why we're still in. And definitely we're approaching our engagement with the project from a perspective of we expect it to be a good investment for the district. But yes, we need to do those checks and make sure before we make any official commitments. In terms of the cost, within the capital improvement program, we do have a line item for our cost of participation in this project. And that includes not only our share of capital costs or debt service payments toward the construction of facilities, it would also include our share of operational costs for the cost of actually moving water in and out of the reservoir over the future planning horizon. And when looking out over 25 years, adding up all those annual costs, yes, it adds up to approximately the amount Director Weed suggested. But that should not be interpreted as strictly a capital cost. It's the full cost of participation over that planning horizon.
And that is for 9,000 CFS of dedicated storage.
So that would be, yeah, I think for approximately 9,000 acre feet of dedicated storage within the reservoir, as well as a proportional share of the various conveyance facilities.
And for a small fraction of that cost, there's Del Valle Reservoir, which is built, plumbed, and paid for. Thank you.
I'm done.
Director
I
Akbari.
don't have any questions so far. My comments were actually going to be very much in line with Director Huang's. So I'll leave it at that.
Gunther. Any size project of this size, at this level, this stage of the game, there's going to be open-ended questions. I think most of the issues that have just been raised are very much in negotiations at the moment. There are other projects out there that we continue to look at. And I support our position where we continue to look at this. This is very viable and it's going to require a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Cooperation among some people that, agencies that haven't cooperated before. This is what it's going to be. And it's not a lot different than when we formed BOSCA. Was it perfect? No. But did we need it? Yes. So there's still a business case out there. Tonight's meeting isn't the business case meeting. So I'm still on board.
Can I, before Dr. Sethy, final
Yeah.
summary?
Please.
There was an original proposal in the water plan going back to the days of the Perfield Canal for a larger dam, for a dam to be built near the transfer station, some 5 miles downstream of the current Las Vaqueras Reservoir, which we chose not to participate in as we did the second raise, for 500,000 acre feet, which with saddle dams could be raised to 1 million acre feet of storage. And contra cost, and that could be built for about the cost of what we're talking about, raising the current dam and adding 100,000 acre feet of storage. It's amazing that the politics of water currently is based on transferring water out of Northern California to provide it to Southern California or in regions of Southern California, the Southern Delta. But ultimately, if this project is built, those of us will be promoting to remove the dam, because when we rebuild the 500,000 acre foot reservoir, which was part of the record of decision in 2004, we'll have to remove LV 1, 2, and 3 should it be built. Well, thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I appreciate the staff providing an update and how periodically you are going to come before committees and the board for frequent updates over the next year. I am view my role on that board as one of 8 board members and the treasurer really as representing this district and trying to provide a little bit of oversight during the period of time that we develop the business case for whether we ultimately participate or not. And so I have stood by the district's general manager and our board in articulating that we are not definitively committed to the project until we have a good business case to justify the investment on behalf of our communities here. I will comment on some aspects of what I've observed. Being on the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority as the chair there in this project, but I'm also reflecting back on the tear down and rebuild of Calaveras Reservoir. And that was already underway when I joined the board. And that was $1 billion project with major cost overruns, twice what was originally projected. But we had to rebuild that reservoir. It was necessary for our entire Bay Area community. And along with the other WISA projects that were orchestrated by SFPUC, we ultimately reached a $5 billion investment, and then now it's continuing. And our share of those projects, just up to $5 billion, was 4% of the project, set of projects, for $200 million in future bond obligations. That project had so many delays in it, up and down the whole project. Compared to what I'm observing right now on the Los Vaqueros Reservoir project. Even though I can see there might be some delays in getting these agreements done, Director Weed and I attended quite a few of the California Water Commission meetings while the commissioners were considering all of the different proposals for where to spend Prop 1 money. This is of all, I think it's 7 projects are officially approved, 1 withdrew. So this one is the one that's most furthest ahead of all the other state projects. Voters in California approved the bond, that massive bond, in 2014. And when we were at the depth of the drought just last summer and early fall, you know, there were cries across California from California citizens and legislators. What happened to that money? How come it wasn't deployed? How come we don't have any projects done? And now Aqua and others are proposing very large new bonds for the November calendar next year. I saw one new one today that I wasn't even aware of. So I actually admire this team and seeing it from initiation to this stage right now, I feel like it's been one of the smoothest developments of a project I've ever seen. And remember, I've worked on some very large projects in high technology, multi-year projects. So I can reflect back on some of those other experiences. And I feel like the Contra Costa team is outstanding. All of the agencies that are participating are outstanding. Everybody, using the words of Director Gunther, are feeling that this is perhaps the best example of a regional project with so many benefits up and downstream. And if you look at, I just mentioned San Luis Delta Mendota Authority, and you look at all the cities, the irrigation districts, the water districts that are beneficiaries of this project, the wetlands And I will just share personally that one reason I like this project is because I feel that we as citizens owe an obligation back to the environment. And if nothing else happens or is accomplished here, I will have felt that this was a valuable investment from me as a human being, that I can offer this to future generations. So I have heard, I'm not going to get into the weeds here on things because I'm so deeply embedded on what's going on. But I thank the staff for the update, and I look forward to the progress that we make. And if anything significant comes up in my role as a board member there, I certainly will bring it to the attention of this board. Thank you.
My understanding is that the environmental benefit, which is, or the public benefit, which is the only area which bond money could be spent on, was to put water, about 44,000 acre feet a year of water to grasslands, which is near Las Banas and far better served by San Luis Reservoir than by Los Vaqueros Reservoir. So it's an interesting interpretation and reach for the environmental benefit of this water. Grasslands needs water. They have 2,500 TDS. We're talking about giving them some fairly good quality, remarkably high quality water, which will be parked at San Luis in order to provide it to grasslands. Thank you.
Well, I'm not offering a rebuttal, but just a different perspective. Prop 1 bond money was not to pay for construction of water projects. What the California voters bought into was that we were investing in public benefits where the beneficiaries of these projects would be the payees, along with whatever other finances they could get, like through a WIFIA loan and EPA. So the $477 million that was committed by the California Water Commission is the investment in the public benefits. That's a huge investment that we haven't seen happen in California ever. And now we were just in Sacramento visiting for a full day with legislators in the governor's office to get an appropriate inflation adjustment, because the bond was approved in 2014. The dollars were committed in 2015 dollars, and now we're looking at a project that won't be done until early 2030s. So that's where we're at right now. And I think we all need to understand that we as voters who approved the bond, we were not paying for construction. We were paying for environmental benefits.
And in this case, that environmental benefit is water to grasslands, which is the area around Las Banas.
I will also add that Rick Ortega, the general manager down there, Ellen Weir, who sits on the board, our board representing grasslands, they're not making any investment in this project either.
Bingo.
However, in the last 30 years, all of the resources within the Central Valley Delta Mendota system was only able to provide grasslands with adequate water 2 out of the last 30 years. This is where we solve a major problem, and it's a wildlife problem. You can't have continuous Pacific flyovers and helping to nurture the environment unless you have regular flows. Where I would agree with you is that, and they even acknowledge it, they could take lower quality water if we can deliver it to them.
much lower quality water.
Yes. So
Okay, thank you.
anyway, let's move on.
If I could just clarify one point before we move on. The public funding is for the public benefits, which is substantially the environmental benefits for grasslands and other, kind of refuge water supply in the Central Valley. But there is an element of it that's for urban kind of drought resilience emergency supply. So it's not 100% dedicated to the environmental.
Taken.
It'd be interesting to know what that split is. Thank you.
To be determined.
All right, so
Presence at the,
does staff have,
before we move on to the next.
sure. 10 minutes or 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay. Let's do a 5-minute break real quick here. At 2 minutes after.
Yeah.
All right, we'll call the meeting back to order and we'll move on to the next presentation on the annual water supply and demand assessment for 2023.
All right, next up tonight, staff will be providing an overview of the district's draft annual water supply and demand assessment. While we would typically cover this topic in the Water Resources and Conservation Committee, we included this topic in today's workshop, given the potential broader interest as we are transitioning out of drought conditions. I'd now like to turn it over to Thomas Nizer, the district's water supply and planning manager, to introduce this item and tonight's speaker who's joining us online.
Thank you, Ms. Itis. And you stole words right out of my mouth. I did want to introduce this subject of water supply and demand assessment. This is something that came out of the last drought and took many years to get in place. And this is a stress test of our water supplies. And the idea here is that water agencies need to do an annual stress test of the water supply situation to communicate in public format to the general public how close we all are to being in a drought with restrictions. The message we heard in 2014, 2015 from the public was, we didn't know our water supply situation was so bad off. So this test is supposed to just every year, just push on that. Took them a long time to get it in place. And the very first year we did it was actually right when we're in the next drought. As Ms. Heides mentioned, our process to do this is pretty much a procedural annual thing. The board has already authorized a general manager to just approve this, and we'll just get the board the information through committee. But because of the potential public attention of coming out of a drought, there may be some press coverage of these water supply and demand assessments. We thought it'd be good to use this opportunity to bring it to the board. So it's an unusual sort of presentation tonight. So I would like to introduce Devin Becker, Water Resources Engineer. Devin, are you online?
I am, Thomas. Can you hear me okay?
Great. Yes, we got you. So Devin's working from home. He's protecting all of our health. So he's responsibly working from home today. And it's my dubious honor to get to inform the board that this will probably be the last time you hear from Devin. He is resigning from the district. So we've really appreciated the significant contribution he's made to the district for past, I don't even know, Devin, 7 years. And we're going to miss him. But anyway, just wanted to inform the board. Devin, go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nizer, and good afternoon, members of the board, staff, and the public. And just very briefly, I want to say it has really been my privilege to serve the community in my role here at ACWD, and just want to say a very warm thank you to the district. So with that, I will move on to the presentation for tonight. These first two slides for the water supply and demand assessment are actually review slides from last year's presentation on the WSDA. But I will go through them quickly just as a refresher. So the annual water supply and demand assessment, or WSDA, is a state requirement resulting from 2018 water use efficiency legislation. And the state requires urban water suppliers to submit their WSDA annually by July 1st. And this requirement began last year in 2022. And actually the state asked last year as we were in the midst of drought, as Mr. Nizer mentioned, that we submitted a month early. So last year submission deadline was June 1st, but now we are back on the typical schedule for July 1st, and that's what we will do going forward. WSDAs should be closely integrated with an agency's UWMP and also its water shortage contingency plan. And Mr. Nizer also mentioned really the WSDA is a stress test. The state uses it as a tool for near-term drought planning, just to determine what a current year and subsequent dry year might look like statewide. So specifically, WSDAs are mass balance analysis of supply and demand, and it's done on a monthly time step. The analysis evaluates the supplier's water supply reliability for the current year, and then that year followed by one dry year. And so it's on a fiscal year basis, which, you know, is a little different than we might do if we were just doing it internally, because not all of our supplies are on a fiscal year basis. But just to explain what that is, the current fiscal year represents the year starting July 1st, 2022 and ending June 30th, 2023. So we're almost done with the current year analysis in terms of just our timeline starting right now in April of 2023. And then the following fiscal year is the fiscal year 23-24. So starting July 1st, 2023, ending June 30th, 2024. And the WSDA submittal tables that are required by the state are broken out into several sections. One is on demands, the other is on supplies, and then there's a demand and supply comparison. And then there are also water shortage response actions corresponding to a different stage of your shortage according to your water shortage contingency plan. So next slide. Just a little bit more background on the WSDA methodology. So the procedure for compiling the WSDA is outlined in our water shortage contingency plan, which was last updated in 2020. We use existing modeling tools. So ACWD, we use our production optimization model, and that incorporates, it's a 2-year model, and incorporates unconstrained demand forecast, our current water supplies and constraints, and then a subsequent dry year water supply and constraint scenario. And we take that from our most recent UWMP single critical dry year, which in this case, from our most recent UWMP is 1977. The production optimization model incorporates infrastructure capabilities and constraints. And it also starts with initial groundwater conditions and then simulates those conditions on a monthly time step throughout the model. And then lastly, WSDA methodology has us rely on our water shortage contingency plan for any shortage response actions corresponding to a shortage level. So next slide. So this is maybe the most important slide. The WSDA is really just a compliance requirement for ACWD. We do not use it as a planning tool. As Mr. Nizer mentioned, right, this is just a stress test, and the requirements dictate the use of hypothetical data assumptions. So the idea that this next fiscal year is going to mimic 1977 water supply conditions, when we know right now, looking forward, that that's certainly not the case, where we have 100% table A allocation, for example, for this calendar year. We have a full San Francisco system, and our local groundwater basin is also full. So we know that this next fiscal year will not look like 1977, and yet that's what we're required to do for this analysis. So just to reemphasize in a different way, our ACWD's near-term water supply planning is far more realistic and informed, and that's what we use internally. And then typically the WSDA analysis is presented at the Water Resources and Conservation Committee, with the general manager authorized to approve the report prior to submission to DWR. So next slide. So this is a busy slide. Apologies. This is a snapshot from the draft analysis for the report that's submitted to DWR. On the top, you see potable water shortage assessment. And so this is for the following fiscal year if 1977 water supply conditions were to recur, which we know they're not. And if you look on the second green row from the top, at the far right side, you'll see -13. So that would be our shortfall between our supplies and demands if we were in a 1977 recurrence. And then right below that line, the next green line, you'll see the shortage level associated with what that would be. So that would be a shortage level 2, which again, from our water shortage contingency plan, a shortage between 10 and 20% is a level or stage 2 shortage. If we keep moving down this table, the second yellow line that has numbers across it, this is basically the amount of shortfall that would be made up from water shortage response actions that have already been outlined in our water shortage contingency plan. And I will note were proved to be effective in this last drought. And so you can see this is on a monthly time step, and that's where that shortfall is made up. And then if you look at the bottom number on that this last green row on the right, you'll see a 2% surplus according to this analysis if those water shortage response actions were put in place. So this is what we're required to do for this analysis. And the potable analysis is what we just went through on the top. We have non-potable water shortage assessment on the bottom here, but we don't show a shortfall even if 1977 were repeated. So we're just going to move on from that. But that's just a quick walkthrough of what what that analysis looks like and what we end up submitting to DWR. So next slide. So our draft results, just to summarize, there are no water shortage response actions required for 2023. The table we just looked at was for the following fiscal year, but I will say that, and this is no surprise based on our current water supply situation, but through the end of this current fiscal year, we do not anticipate any shortage whatsoever. So as outlined in our 2020 water shortage contingency plan, the results of the WSDA will only trigger actions that the district would have to do under the following circumstances. And I'll just read this out loud. If a shortage is identified for the current year conditions, so that would be fiscal year 22-23, then the procedures outlined in the district's water shortage contingency plan for that level of shortage will be followed. Otherwise, no actions will be triggered. So since we don't have any shortage through the end of this current fiscal year, we don't have any shortage actions that we need to put in place. And that's no surprise. And then the second bullet here on this slide is just sort of reiterating the table results that we saw. So that would be for the following fiscal year, 23-24, that 1977 water supply reliability or availability would result in a 13% shortage. And our stage 2 actions would be sufficient to avoid a shortfall. But again, we're not required to do anything based on that analysis. All we have to do is submit those tables to DWR for compliance for this year. So next slide. And this is the last slide and just the next steps of what we will do. Staff will finalize the WSDA analysis and present it to the general manager for approval. And then we will submit the WSDA report to DWR by the July 1st, 2023 deadline. And with that, I conclude the presentation this evening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Wish you well on whatever new pursuit you're going after. We'll miss you. And don't see any members of the public here attending either in person or online. So I will turn it back to the board unless you have more comments to make. Mr. Nicer.
No, just underscore what this says and why we want just to make the board aware. Should the media pick up, every agency is going to be putting this out. And it's conceivable some media report would come out and say, it's possible that all of California would be back in a level 2 shortage next year. That's the status of our water supply system. As demonstrated, it's a stress test that is not really realistic, but we see the potential for it being misused in a public dialogue. And that's why we just wanted to sort of refresh the board on what this is and what it is not. One concluding comment.
We could always offer an educational video for the journalists out there.
Quick question. This past year, Santa Cruz was offered an exemption from the state water mandates for reduction of water supply because they had met the goals of water use per capita, and they had a reservoir which had enough water to meet their needs through the month of September. Arguably, San Francisco PUC would have also been eligible for an exemption, but for political reasons chose not to request it. Have we looked at what it would be from our standpoint, what it would take, particularly with a groundwater reservoir, to be able to potentially request an exemption from state water restrictions in the future?
I'm going to confess, I'm not aware of what you're speaking of.
Yeah. I can speak to that. So I think, Director Reed, you're talking about an exemption from the conservation requirements.
Yes.
And I think,
For the stage 1, 2, sorry.
right, and we wouldn't have qualified for that ourselves regardless. I think even what San Francisco might choose to do, because we're a state water project contractor, and anybody who was part of that system was not allowed to be part of the exemption from what I recall.
All right, thank you for that clarification. You're right. Santa Cruz was not part of the state system or this central project, and therefore we're able to get the exemption. Thank you.
Report, appreciate you bringing us explanation.
Yes, thank you very much for the update here.
Thank you, Deb.
And thank you,
Thank you, Devin.
Mr. Becker, the board might be interested in knowing if you're going off to our competition or not.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Yeah, I can say my wife and I were moving actually to Europe. So we're moving to Portugal. Yeah, so it's quite a big shift. And I just appreciate the kind words. And I do actually hope to continue in this field and even maybe work in California water from abroad, but I'll have to keep you updated on that search.
Regrettably, our HR manager wouldn't allow work from home policy that extended to Portugal. I tried.
We're the modern age, but enjoy the wine.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next presentation on the fish ladder operations and water stewardship program update.
Great, thank you, Director Sethy. The next item includes an update on the district's flows program, which I think you will all enjoy. And I know the team has a lot of really fun things to share. So to jump right in, I'll turn it over to Mr. Nizer to introduce the item and his team members who are presenting today.
Thank you very much. Before I get on here, let's get another tech question. Kelsey, are you online?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. Okay. Great. Well, this is a slight change of course from the previous two topics. We all know in 1997, the steelhead was listed as a threatened species under the Federal Endangered Species Act, and that started a cascade of events that the district has been partaking in at a definitive regional project level. We've had 25 years of organization, of scoping, of designing, of funding, and ultimately building fisheries improvements just in our own organization, but also in coordination and in concert with other watershed interests. So we're all done, right? We've had this joke before, we don't get it, just walk away. It really begins a new era of management and a fisheries program for ACWD. And we all know it's one thing to build something, it's a whole another thing to keep it running. And it's been a tremendous effort this year between startup of these new facilities plus initiating, operating under a new regulatory environment with a biological opinion provided by the National Marine Fisheries. And it's a whole new world for ACWD. So I'd like to introduce our tirelessly working staff members that have been implementing, and they've got some fun news for the board tonight. So we've got Mr. Leonard After, Water Supply Supervisor, and Ms. Kelso Shiro, Water Resources Engineer, who is joining us from Hawaii. So I believe we should say aloha. What time it is there. But with that, I'll hand it off to Leonard.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nizer. And it's a pleasure for Ms. Oshiro and I to be able to present this to you tonight. So thank you to the board, to staff, and to the public that hopefully will be watching this later for some of these exciting updates that we get to share with you tonight. We'll start out with. Great, a second. With a brief review of our fish passage improvements program, as well as a more detailed overview of the Rubber Dam #1 fish ladder. Then we'll transition over to Ms. Oshiro, who will provide a summary of the fish ladder operations and water stewardship, or FLOWS program. And then we'll close it out with some highlights from our startup testing and the latest from our initial year of operations. So as a brief overview, more for the public than for those in this room, just wanted to provide the context for these projects. What you see in green as well as in white, outlined in the black line work, is the Alameda Creek watershed. After the Sacramento and San Joaquin watersheds that feed through the Delta, this is the largest watershed that feeds into the San Francisco Bay. 633 square miles extending from Contra Costa County down to Santa Clara County. And east, you'll have to drive through the Altamont Pass to get out of our watershed. Covers a wide range of terrain as well, from completely undeveloped land, ranch land, and in the northern part of the watershed, some significant residential development. With the next slide, just want to provide an overview of why Alameda Creek is important to the water district. And being on the creek, I hear this question quite a bit from customers and trail users of why the connection between the water district and fish passage facilities in the creek. Alameda County Water District gets 40% of our water supply portfolio from local supplies, namely from the Alameda Creek watershed. Those are general terms. About 30% of that we pump from our groundwater, and about 10% is local supplies that we get through water right at Lake Del Valle. Also, the water is critical for our replenishment of the Niles Cone groundwater basin, and the creek itself provides the public with several opportunities for recreation, habitat for wildlife, critical flood control, which we saw this winter was very, very beneficial to our service area. And it provides an aesthetic and environmental value. And namely, it is a fish migration corridor, which is why we're talking about these projects today. With the next slide, I'll just mention that it's part of the Water District's mission statement to be a good steward of the environment. And that's why we're a proud founding member of the Alameda Creek Fisheries Restoration Work Group. Our objective in participating in the work group is to support that fisheries restoration while ensuring reliability of our critical water supplies. And overall, the Fish Passage Improvements Program is not just one project, it's several projects that have spanned many years. We're finally at the point where we can put the capstone on this project, on this program, with the completion of the Shin Screen diversions, as well as the Rubber Dam #1 barbed weir fish ladder. And it is our hope that through these new facilities and screened diversions, we'll be able to provide some operational enhancements that will ensure the reliability of those local supplies well into the future. With the next slide, I'll just give a very brief overview of before the construction of the Rubber Dam #1 and the drop structure, the bar drop structure ladder. The before conditions, going sort of from left to right, you'll see the BART trains tracks, that bridge that crosses the creek. You'll see Alameda County Flood Control's drop structure, and that's comprised of a 22-degree slope that's 9 feet high and 40 feet long. And at the bottom of that slope are what we affectionately call the Dragon's Teeth. there are 4-foot high energy dissipators that are used to slow the flow of water, dissipate the energy before that high flow of water reaches the piers that support the BART bridge, the BART tracks. With the next slide, oh, I'm sorry, we just go back one. And then lastly, I should mention rubber dam number 1 is towards the right. And that dam is inflated, creating an impoundment that then allows us to do diversions of our local supplies through screened diversions upstream. And now with the next slide, this is a rendering that our project engineering team created that shows the design of this very complex fish ladder. And again, going from left to right, the arrows here point to the lower fish ladder, the transition pool, and then the upper fish ladder, and finally towards the right is the exit where in-migrating fish will exit the ladder and where water flowing from right to left will enter the ladder. A lot of the terminology I'll be using today regarding exits and entrances are from the vantage point of an in-migratory fish, an adult fish swimming up into the watershed. So it's very confusing, but I just wanted to provide that caveat. With the next slide, I'll start with the lower fish ladder. This is a vortex pull and shoot design. This is a very passive structure. There are no valves that need to be operated. There's no monitoring equipment in this portion of the facility. And when it's filled with water, as you'll see in the next slide, it provides a cascade of 1-foot drops that allow water to flow downstream and in-migrant fish to easily pass through a wide range of flow conditions. With this next slide, I want to highlight the transition pool that's located between the upper and lower fishways. That transition pool provides a low flow channel, and then in higher flows, as you can see in this photo, water can actually span the entire width of the flood control channel in that general area where the dragon's teeth are located. With the next slide, this is the most complex portion of the fish ladder, so I really wanted to provide a more detailed view into the ladder. It's very difficult for members of the public to understand this facility. If you're standing on top of it, you just see a bunch of grading. If you're standing on the opposite side of the creek, all you see is a lot of concrete. So what I provided here along the top is sort of a cutaway profile of what the upper portion of the fish ladder looks like if you were to basically saw it in half. The photo underneath just shows the concrete walls. Again, if you're on the opposite side of the creek, you don't see much. The concrete walls are sort of that tan color in the profile at the top. The black oval is rubber dam number 1. You can see that part of this ladder is located downstream of RD1 and part of it is upstream of RD1. And then the black line that you see generally towards the top is the grading. So as you walk along the top of the ladder, there are some portions where the grading goes down behind a concrete wall. With the next slide, I wanted to highlight the vertical slots. The stairs or steps within this ladder are created through hydraulic design so that each pool provides a 1-foot head drop from one pool to the next. And the way that it achieves that is through these vertical slots. So there are 2 concrete walls. They have a 1-foot gap between them, and water flows at a range of flows will flow through there and provide the maximum hydraulic jump of 1 foot, which would allow for in-migrant steelhead, in-migrant salmon to be able to swim upstream. And if you could just go back 1 second, and I did want to highlight those blue-green rectangles that you see towards the right of the profile. Those represent the locations of the exit gates. And those exit gates allow us to operate this ladder at a range of impoundment levels. And so if the impoundment is completely full, we'll have the rightmost upstream exit gate open. If you think of an extension ladder you have at home, fully extended. It's a concrete facility, so it's very hard to move it around easily. So what we did instead is have a fixed structure, but multiple top rungs of the ladder. And those exit gates can be opened or closed depending on the conditions out of the creek. And then the exit gate number 1, which is the 5th from the right, is the lowest exit gate that we can operate. So again, this allows us to operate from a completely full impoundment down to no impoundment at all. The dam could be completely deflated and that upper fish ladder can still be functional to provide for passage. With this next slide, I wanted to highlight some of our monitored equipment. This monitoring equipment is exclusive to just this fish ladder. It's not, we don't have this equipment in our fish ladder that's at RD3. What you see with that red circle that's just downstream of the black oval representing RD1, that's the approximate location of a sonar camera. So we have a sonar camera down towards the bottom of that pool, and that provides the ability to capture sonar video that we can later post-process and collect imagery of fish passing through the facility. And then what you see with those yellow bars towards the left of the profile, those yellow bars represent the 2 locations where we have 2 sets of pit tag antennas. These are antenna loops. You can see the photo on the left shows the upper loop, which extends from the top of those concrete walls that create that vertical slot, all the way up to the top of the grating and from wall to wall. So that's a complete loop around that opening. So at very high flow conditions, water is actually over the top of the concrete walls and water is flowing through that upper loop. Now we also have the lower loop. It's a little harder to see because the photo is taken directly down looking at that vertical slot. But that lower loop fully encircles that vertical slot. So it extends from the very floor of the pool along both sides of that 1 foot opening and then along the top of the wall. So those lower loops and upper loops, again, provide ability to detect fish that pass through that facility at a range of flow rates. And in case you're curious, around 75 CFS, you get water up to the top of the concrete walls. Higher than 75 CFS, you begin detecting through the upper loops and lower loops. If it's less than 75 CFS, then all the water is going through the lower loops. With the next slide, I wanted to highlight what the loops are for. On the lower right, you see a photo of a 12 millimeter glass capsule. And inside of that is a bunch of head spinning technology, but it's basically an active transponder. When it passes through an electromagnetic field created by our antenna, that passive transponder emits a unique identifier that is captured by the antenna and recorded by a computer and then uploaded to the cloud. So from my phone, magic technology, I can keep an eye on whether there are tags that are being detected by our antenna. And of course, we have a database, so we can always go back. I'm not looking at my phone all the time.
Can I get that app for my Christmas present?
We're gonna collect the data. We'll have an annual report, so we can. I'll give you a 1-year snapshot. But as you know, with the press release, we were able to detect the first passage of a pit tag that wasn't a test tag that went through that antenna. So I'll get into that later. But the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, or SFPUC, they conduct annual electrofishing surveys across many locations in the upper watershed that's in their jurisdiction. They conduct these electrofishing surveys. They record the number of fish, the variety of species that they collect during those surveys. The electrofishing stuns the fish for a brief period of time, during which they can collect them, count them, and then for species of interest like the steelhead, the juvenile lomicus that you see here in the photo on the upper left, they're able to weigh it and to measure it, which is the photo on the lower left, and then they implant those fish with a pit tag, and that's the upper right photo that you see. It doesn't harm the fish. That part of that glass encapsulation is supposed to be biologically benign to doesn't interact with the fish biology. So those tagged juvenile fish, those omicus up in the watershed, some of them are expected to leave the watershed and go out into salt water. And that's where the magic of technology, we can pick up that fish as that tag passes through the antenna. We get a reading on our antenna that indicates that a fish has left. So there's a close coordination with SFPUC staff. When we do get a unique ID that correlates to their tags, then we can find out more information about that fish. And that's why you had that press release that we were able to put together and disseminate earlier this week, which tells us quite a bit about that fish. That particular fish was captured in an SFPUC electrofishing survey conducted on October 7th at a location about 1.25 miles downstream of the confluence of Alameda Creek and Calaveras Creek. So farther up in the watershed, farther upstream than Sonoma, but not quite to Calaveras Creek. And for the next portion to talk about our flows program, I'll turn it over to Ms. Kelsey Oshiro, who will explain the flows program.
Great, thank you, Ms. Josh. So yes, just a brief overview again of our FLOWS program. So FLOWS stands for Fish Ladder Operations and Water Stewardship, or FLOWS program. And the goal of this is to enhance fish passage in Alameda Creek while maintaining water supply goals on an ongoing basis. ACWD will operate, monitor, and adaptively manage creek facilities in accordance with the biological opinion or BIO, and coordinate program activities with other watershed stakeholders. And next slide, thank you. And this slide has the flow program elements. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Thank you. So the first is compliance. And so this includes compliance with our daily bypass flows, operations of our fish ladders and screens, development and implementation of our adaptive management plan, performing monitoring activities, and submitting annual reports to regulators and planters per our biological opinion. And then part of that too is also coordinating dry year plus flow releases. Other aspects of the flow program elements include coordination with our watershed stakeholders and regulators for our watershed activities. And we also have a cost share with the flood control district. And if you hit enter, oh, thank you. And for the creek-related community engagement, which is also a large part of our FLOWS program, that includes public education and outreach, as well as participating in community events. And next slide, please. And here's sort of a list of our program elements, and I'm not going to read through all of them, but just highlighting that there's several components to the FLOWS program. Like previously mentioned, there are several reporting requirements, as well as testing. And so today we're actually going to dive into a couple of these highlights of this program, and just running through some of our exciting experiences and developments throughout this in preparation for these startup of operations, as well as what's been happening in this first quarter, as Mr. Ash has mentioned briefly as well. So next slide, please. So prior to operation, we did do startup testing as part of our FLOWS program. And so the purpose of this startup testing for the fish ladders was to gain operational familiarity with the system controls, operations, as well as our safety protocols, and confirming that our monitoring equipment was properly calibrated. And this began as soon as we could, and this is at the end of November of 2022, and occurred throughout December as well. And next slide, please. And so as part of the startup testing, one of the very important aspects of making sure everything's working is just making sure that fish passage was being allowed through our fish ladders. And so this included two important components, which included the head drop measurements as well as velocity measurements. And so, the head drop measurements, we wanted to be sure that the fish could pass safely through the different pools, and making sure that the head drop wasn't too large. And so we did simulate high and low flows throughout the fish ladder, and it was collected across a range of flow conditions that was possible for fish. And so juvenile spillway was also tested as well. And similarly, velocity measurements were tested, and this was to form a baseline as well for average velocities within the fish passageways, and we used a velocity meter as well. And here to the right, we see our own ACWD staff here, Jeremy, assisting with these tests as well. And next slide, please. Also, we tested our monitoring equipment, making sure that it was all calibrated. And so as Ms. Nash mentioned previously, we do have a sonar camera, or the R sonar camera, as well as our pit type antennas. And so we wanted to become familiar with the camera operation. And for the pit type antennas, we just wanted to test various flows for both the upper and lower pit type antennas. And pictured here to our left is our fisheries biologist, Joe Mers with Cran Fish Sciences. And he's been a great and critical and crucial part to our team. And he's been offering a lot of expertise throughout this whole process. And he is holding the market fish that we use for testing. Next slide, please. Great. So a little bit more detail about the R sonar cameras. So here to the left, you see the camera without any flow going through the fish ladder. And to the right, you will see the fish ladder with flow. And you see similarly the same ladder on your left, and then the camera is currently submerged. And see, next slide, please. And so here, a little later in this presentation, we'll be showing a couple of exciting clips that we got from our sonar camera footage. But just to orient ourselves here, so we do here have on the very left-hand side a vertical slots, and then the picture in the middle has letters A. The letter A is a little hard to see, but it's where the floor level of the fish ladder meets the wall, and then we have going from kind of left to right, B and C, and then D, E, and F on the right-hand side. And you'll see that point D is about 4 meters from my camera. And on this right-hand image here, you'll see the corresponding letters A through F. So that'll hopefully orient ourselves a little bit as we when we get to the videos that we're going to show you here soon. And next slide, please. And these were the fish that were market fish that were used for testing of the R sonar camera. And so a couple of items that we use here, you see the float, which is used to keep the fish oriented and off the channel bottom. We also use a stator rod used for taking water depths and holding the weight in place. And then the larger fish is an Atlantic salmon that was bought in the market, as well as a striped bass, which is a smaller fish on the bottom of the photo. And we also have an 8-ounce weight. And we also use an aluminum can for the testing as well. And so next slide, please. And here, this is a little bit more orientation for the sonar camera image. So you'll see that the Atlantic salmon market fish has bolts going through it. And then you'll see here, sort of at your top left hand corner, you'll see the corresponding bolts pointed out with the arrows. You'll kind of see the outline of the fish in the image here as well. And next slide. Great. And so these images were produced based off of the testing of floating the market fish through the PAS camera. And so in this first slide here, you'll see on the left-hand side an echogram showing the movement of the object in the box. And so there's that little red square, a little hard to see, but it points out where the fish could be seen on the echogram. And this technology, the software is available with our sonar camera software package, and our fisheries biologist team have been processing this data. And so on the right is actually the image of the fish. In the right, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see that this is just showing that the echogram is picking up the movement of the fish during this test run. And so you see that the red square has moved positions in the echogram. And this is also shown in the image on the right-hand side as well with the fish. And we'll be going through a couple of videos here in a couple of slides, so it'll be a little easier to orient yourselves as well. Let's see. Okay, and then next slide, please. And continuing with the monitoring equipment, we did test various flows of the upper and lower antennas for the pit tank antennas. And so you'll see here the photo on the left shows the floats or the orange items, and each of these have a pit tag in them. They're similar. The pit tag itself is similar to what you would microchip your cats and dogs with, so they're very tiny, as Mr. Ash has shown. And the photo on the right-hand side shows East Bay Park staff dropping these floats individually into the ladder upstream of the antenna. And we have great coordination, collaboration with East Bay Parks and other regulatory agencies as well. And we definitely appreciate all of the great teamwork with them. And the summary of the results of our pit tag test is that we had 50 test tags, and they were at least one of them all were detected at least on one of the antennas, and 39 tags were detected at both antennas. And so compiling all the data and comparing it from the test, it was estimated that we'd have a 98% chance of detecting a tagged fish going to the ladder. So it was great results that we got from the pit tag tests. And next slide, please. And other tasks that we did during startup testing included going through the daily data collection processes, running through. We have several data sheets that we our water controllers will go through daily, and so there's some training on that as well as getting feedback on that. And we're very appreciative of all the hard work that the water controllers have been doing. And we also looked at refining fish and predator monitoring observation protocols and procedures, and we are working with the resource agencies on that as well. And you'll see in the picture here our very own Russ Perry collecting the floats with the pit tags in them as they came out of the entrance gate. So it was a all hands on deck effort, and we're definitely very appreciative of all of our internal staff as well as all the work with our watershed stakeholders and resource agencies as well. And with that, I'll pass it off back to Mr. Ash to provide an overview of our winter operations.
All right, thank you, Ms. Oshiro. As she mentioned, it was quite a bit of effort to confirm the physical and monitoring equipment was operating effectively prior to our January 1st start of our biological opinion. So in a short order of 5 weeks, we had a lot of components to test under a wide range of conditions, focusing mostly on what was anticipated for the period from March through May. And so it was a very successful series of tests. We were able to confirm that the hydraulic design from our project engineering staff was spot on, and the system performed as we anticipated. So it was a big sigh of relief that we were entering into 2023 with a functioning operational fish ladder that would not harm but provide passage for the fish. So we're ready to go. And then the day before our buyout became effective, we had very high flows in Alameda Creek. And to protect the fish ladder from being filled with sediment, we did close off the ladder, both ladders, RD1 and RD3, so that those facilities were protected from those very high flow rates and lots of suspended cobbles, boulders, and gravel that were rumbling around through the bottom of the channel. So with the next slide, I'll show you, this is the hydrograph. You can see the flows in Alameda Creek. This is from the Niles gauge from USGS, just to give you an approximate indication of what the flow rates were in Alameda Creek since the biological opinion became effective January 1st. And what you see are very high flows. What is an important line to look at is the 1000 CFS line and the 2000 CFS line. That rough band between those lines represents higher flows, the ladder is going to be shut. At lower flows, we could open the ladder theoretically. We wanted to be mindful not to damage the new facility right out of the gate. So we were very cautious. We did operate for part of one day on January 8th. Brief interval between atmospheric river events and luckily no Del Val reservoir releases. So the flows dropped off just enough. Remember, we were thick in a drought, so we were very trying to capture as much water as we could, not knowing that this was going to be a long winter. So we did operate for one day. We were able to raise the dam, divert some water, and run the fish ladder for part of that day. High flows continued, especially with the successive atmospheric river events and the subsequent reservoir releases up in the watershed. So it wasn't until later in January where we could really operate the fish ladder for an extended period of time. We did have some higher flows again with more rain, and we have been operating continuously now since March 25th. One of the things that I would like to highlight is that I have the pleasure of presenting today, but it really is a team effort. We had a lot of requests for assistance from our engineering department staff as we were responding and trying to understand a new facility, responding to issues that came up with the construction, and also from our facilities maintenance division and the operations department, helping us respond to a number of issues that the wet weather presented, not just to the new fish ladder facilities, but a lot of our groundwater recharge facilities. So a huge thanks to a district-wide effort to provide safe fish passage and to be able to replenish our depleted groundwater subbasin. With the next slide, I just wanted to show a few of the highlights, the real excitement in the ladder. This photograph was taken on December 12th, so we were still conducting our startup testing. On December 12th, we still hadn't gained enough confidence in operating the facility to have it running in automatic control 24/7. So we were limiting our operations of the fish ladder only to when staff could be present to observe conditions. So at the end of every workday, we would have to shut down the ladder. Now, this Chinook salmon was trying to get upstream and didn't realize that it was a game of musical chairs and the music just stopped. So we did have some salmon that were in the ladder when we were trying to dewater the ladder. It took a little coaxing, a little flushing to nudge them back downstream. They had to wait, but the next day we opened it up again and they were able to make passage farther upstream. So that was a very positive indication. Early on, we did see Chinook salmon, as you might remember, in October of 2021. The ladder was not completed, so the barbed wire was still a permanent barrier for passage. So we had quite a number of Chinook salmon. We estimate around 60 or so that we saw on one particular occasion that couldn't pass. So they spawned downstream of the barbed wire and perished in that location. A better news story for them this past winter, because the ladder was operational, we were able to observe salmon in the ladder and very high up in the ladder, giving us increased confidence that there were perhaps other salmon that we didn't see that might have made it all the way through this ladder. Keep in mind, RD3 was inflated, so they also had to get through the ladder at RD3. So we were kind of flying blind, not exactly sure how successful things were going until we started getting some anecdotal reports from the Alameda Creek Alliance volunteers that were observing farther up in the watershed. They started sending in photos and video of some Chinook salmon farther up in the watershed, giving us greater confidence that perhaps these ladders are working and Chinook salmon could be a proxy for steelhead. If it works for Chinook, it's likely going to work for steelhead. And I myself was able to see a Chinook salmon jump over the low flow weir at the Nile staging area. So I have personal excitement there to see that in December. So even during our startup testing, we were getting a lot of positive feedback, both from our observations and from anecdotal information we're receiving from observers up in the watershed. But the next slide, I also wanted to highlight that in January, we saw not just one Pacific lamprey. On this particular date, this was from February 27th, I counted no fewer than 34 Pacific lamprey in the ladder when we were trying to shut it down because of high flows in Alameda Creek. Again, we were able to flush them out, so they all safely exited downstream and could pass again when we opened it up later that day. Pacific lamprey are also anadromous. They can spend part of their life cycle out in the ocean and can come back to spawn up in fresh water, up in Alameda Creek watershed. Similarly, we do have reports from SFPUC that they are seeing a great increase in the number of reds, which are egg nests of the Pacific lamprey up in their jurisdiction, farther up in the watershed. Again, giving us greater confidence that our facilities are passable for Pacific lamprey as well. And there are species mentioned in our biological opinion. And now for the icing on the cake, I'll pass it back to Mrs. Shiro, who has some video clips to show you from our sonar camera.
Great, thank you, Mr. Ash. Yes, and so these are our sonar camera videos, and these are a couple from December, and so we'll probably play through it a couple of times because they're quick, but it does show a fish moving through the fish ladders. If you want to maybe hover at the bottom. Oh, there it is. Great, thank you. And hit play. You can see the little flicker. It was quick. I know our consultant tried to mark it with a little green circle, so we can try to play that again and see if you can see it. But there it is, the kind of S-curve wave that the fish is making. I think is pretty visible, but it was very exciting when we were able to they did found this footage of the fish moving through the fish ladder and the camera was picking it up. So it was definitely very exciting. And if you go to the next slide, this is another video that they had, and you'll see those light green bands kind of highlights where the fish is going. You see it moving through the slots there. Yeah, and so it's very brief, but definitely very exciting. Just like Leonard said, it's showing that our monitoring equipment is working, and that it shows that fish are moving through our fish ladders, and it's just been a great success. And so it's been really exciting to see all of this for the last quarter or so. But yeah, and with that, I'll pass it back to Mr. Ash to wrap up our summary of our updates here today.
All right, thank you, Ms. Oshiro. And we expect, as I mentioned, this video, our video is post-processed, so we collect it at the site. We have to physically bring the hard drive devices back to the district and then share them with our fisheries biologist consultant. So we expect that the vast majority of the video that we've captured will be processed in the quieter time during the summer. So right now we continue to collect the video, but we're not actively monitoring that video until the end of our season. And with the next slide, just wanted to highlight that since the start of our operations, really, we couldn't have asked for a better start as far as the confirmation that the district's investments in time and energy are already paying off. We've seen Chinook salmon during the in-migration season. We've seen Pacific lamprey during the in-migration season. And as you all know, as of last week, we were able to identify a pit tag associated with a juvenile Omicus, indicating that perhaps this juvenile has been out-migrating during the out-migration season, which is April and May, generally speaking. The one thing we're still waiting for is confirmation that adult steelhead are used in the ladder during the in-migration season. And what would be super ideal, maybe several years down the road, is for one of those adult steelhead returning, having a pit tag, indicating that they started off as juveniles in the watershed, have left, and have returned. So it may be a while before we get that checked off the list, but that would be an ideal confirmation that the complete cycle has occurred. Again, I do want to acknowledge the district's commitment. This is not just a one-year commitment. We've gone through several iterations of this board that have been supportive of these overall projects in the Fish Passage Improvement Program. Several general managers, lots of staff, too many to count. But I did want to highlight our engineering staff for managing very complex designs and very complicated multi-year construction schedules. with a lot of environmental requirements, and their workplace was between two publicly available trails. So talk about working under a microscope. They're out there during the summer working under very intense conditions. Also wanted to thank our operations staff for their ongoing maintenance support, especially dealing with fisheries related equipment, which is sometimes one-off equipment, specialized equipment that's very different than a treatment plant or distribution equipment that they might be used to working with. Also, I wanted to acknowledge the interdepartmental effort of staff to secure grant funding for these projects. Very significant, substantial federal and state grants that we were able to secure. And also our public affairs staff. There's quite a significant public outreach and education component to this new aspect of our operations. And our public affairs staff has been instrumental in helping us bridge that communications with our customers, with the trail users and the wider community. I also want to acknowledge, especially for RD1 fish ladder, that's a joint project. We're partners with Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. They helped fund the project equally with us. They're helping to operate and maintain that facility right alongside us. So they've been an instrumental partner in that aspect of this overall program. And also our partners at San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, who are doing a lot of the intense efforts farther up at crucial habitat, farther up in the watershed. We can provide assistance through the monitor equipment that we have in our facilities to help inform the overall restoration efforts of the watershed. And lastly, the Alameda Creek Fisheries Restoration Work Group, including non-governmental organizations like the Alameda Creek Alliance and others, as well as the state and federal resource agencies for the open communication as we're learning about this new aspect that's a little outside of our day-to-day operations. So again, I have the pleasure to be here with Ms. Oshiro to present this to you, but it really is a team effort that extends back many generations of staff working on this project. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Ms. Oshiro and I are available for any clarification or have any questions.
Can I start off with a few questions? Okay. So, Mr. Ash, thank you very much for absolutely wonderful presentation and update. The same to Ms. Oshiro, wonderful work. So I have a fundamental question. What is the normal pattern of spring and fall runs on steelhead?
For steelhead, we don't expect to see steelhead in the summer and fall. We're going to gather information, so we'll learn more. Right now, there's only limited information of general attributes of an anadromous fish and steelhead, Simcoe steelhead. So we're primarily focused for our biological opinion on the months of January through the end of May. And that's the in-migration season, January, February, March, the out-migration season, April and May. But obviously, fish don't have calendars. They don't follow those precise rules. So we're casting a wider net. As you saw, we wanted our startup testing going as soon as we could. As soon as we got the keys from engineering, we wanted to get started because there may be some early arrivals. There may be some stragglers that come later. Right now, you know, we're technically in the out-migration season, but we're also mindful that there could be some in-migrant adults as well. So we're trying to gather as much information as we can. In many ways, we see ourselves as instrumental in a much larger scientific investigation here. As we gather more information, we'll share it with our partners, and that'll help inform a better understanding of the life cycle for these species. And so right now, we're primarily focused for our biological opinion, but we are mindful of extending beyond that just to collect additional information in case our biological opinion is not exactly precise. I want to emphasize this is a migratory corridor for steelhead. We don't expect steelhead or omicus to necessarily be hanging out in this stretch that's under our span of control. It's a it's an engineered flood control channel. This is not an ideal habitat for any life stage of Olympus. We do expect that they'll use this corridor for out migration and for in migration, but we don't expect them to be hanging around. So that's why we expect that that our range of focus will be generally limited to what's in the biological.
Okay, the California coastal steelhead trout was named an endangered species in the late 90s. Are there studies that you're familiar with on the population of this species within the bay or along the coast? Has it continued to decline? Do we have any reports from catch and release from fishermen as to how often they come across a steelhead, protected steelhead?
I don't have that information handy. I know the Central California steelhead appears in other watersheds as well. There is quite a bit of information that San Francisco has been collecting specific to our watershed and the sort of genetic pool that currently is resident up in the upper watershed. But I can look into that more specifically.
From what I recall, there is steelhead in the Stanislaus, the Tuolumne, and the Merced rivers. Has there been any talk about planting fish up in the watershed? Steelhead.
Planting fish?
Yeah.
There's been discussion about it. At present, that's not recommended. It's not the consensus of the fisheries restoration work group, mainly to protect the genetic pool of resident rainbow trout that is up in the watershed right now. In fact, it was quite contentious of whether it was appropriate to physically relocate fish up over the Bart Weir prior to completion of these fish ladders, just because any reintroduction of new steelhead will have an effect on the genetic makeup of that population. So it's something that the fisheries restoration group does debate, but right now it's something that that I don't believe any agency is keen on implementing.
Okay, let me ask for.
I'd like to add one clarification, because I know the question of fisheries and hatcheries have come up. When we say planting, what Leonard's referring to is the ideal of relocating native fish that are above Calaveras Dam to below the dam to jumpstart the population. As far as planting fish, which implies from a hatchery, that's not going to happen. It's pretty much banned. Yeah, in the state of California.
All right.
Thank you, Mr.
So help me understand something. When you talk about the biological opinion, is this a biological opinion that has been issued in the past that we are trying to conform with?
That's correct. Yes, and I apologize, I didn't expand on that in the presentation. The biological opinion was issued by the National Marine Fisheries Service, NIMS. They're a branch of the Department of Commerce, which includes the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so NOAA. And NIMS, the fisheries component, is nested within all that. So that's the federal agency basically issued the biological opinion is in a way our operational permit for this federally listed threatened species.
And we have to report back to them the data from what we're collecting right now.
That's correct, yes. And Ms. Oshiro and the FLOWS program will be summarizing all this information and providing annual report to both the National Marine Fisheries Service as well as the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, who's also, they were a partner in the biological.
And final question, last fall, we approved this consulting firm to work with us from up in Sacramento, and I met the gentleman down there when I went for a walk, when you were present too. What role are they playing right now?
Yes.
In assisting us in this effort?
Yes, so you're referring to Kramer Fish Sciences, who received the contract from the district for, I believe it's up to a 5-year contract to provide fisheries biology consulting services to the district. We don't have fisheries biologists on staff like San Francisco does, nor is it appropriate for us as we're just starting out to have that resource readily available. So we've contracted with Kramer Fish Sciences. You saw that gentleman holding the market fish. That's Dr. Joe Mers, and he's the principal that we work with. You met one of his staff members, Brett, who is an expert on the sonar. So I can't say enough about the collaboration and the support that they've been able to provide us. It's been very instrumental in being able to respond to changing conditions and better understanding how our operations may affect, positively or negatively, may affect fish passage in our facilities. So we coordinate with them. In fact, Ms. O'Shea, perhaps you'd like to expand a little more. As the program manager for flows, Ms. Oshiro manages the contract with Kramer Fish Science.
Actually, I would like to hand off to some other board members here so we still got a couple of presentations to go, if I may. Thank you for all the information. It's very, very good, and best of luck moving forward.
All right, let me start. First of all, it's my understanding that the steelhead is a threatened species, is not identified as an endangered species.
Federally threatened.
Next, there's an interesting book, An Entirely Synthetic Fish, which goes into discussions of fish hatcheries and the widespread practice of people planting trout throughout watersheds and reservoirs throughout the state and the world, including Yemen. So there's no documented evidence of a specific genetic species in the area of Calaveras or otherwise. This hopes that there was a somehow trapped unique species and genetic stock. But my understanding is they've not done a genetic study to identify a specific subspecies.
That's not correct. That's
Okay.
not correct. It's very well documented that native fish that are resident in Calaveras Dam are the local, what is called an evolutionary significant unit that evolved in this watershed. They're the original stock that's there before settlement.
Well, the fear was that they had been planted so widely.
No.
That it was, the question is where were they not planted, and they were including air drone to ponds up in the Sierras. Next, if we deflate the rubber dams during high flows, would we not also close the fish ladders at the same time?
That's an excellent question. We're learning the dynamics of that right now through our first year of operations. But technically, we can operate the ladder at higher flows than we can operate our dam. So as flows increase, the first thing we'll do is deflate the dam. And that's around 1,200 CFS. Obviously, we make that call depending on conditions. But on average, around 1,200 CFS, we'll have to deflate the dam. The ladder itself can operate anywhere between 1,400 and 2,000 CFS. And again, it depends on conditions, especially turbidity at those flow rates. So the ladder can remain open for a wider range of flows than the dam.
So over 2,000 CFS, do we close the ladder?
Correct. Yes.
And given the season is from January through May, should we continue to operate the fish ladders, particularly since it requires additional flows in the months of May through December, or June through December?
Yes, yes, and that's a very important distinction, is that there are bypass flow requirements spelled out in the biological opinion for every day of the year. And so even during the summer, when we're outside of the migratory seasons, we still have bypass flow requirements to maintain a live channel when the water's available.
Okay. And finally, have we taken the is there a map of the watershed to determine what the water temperatures are, what areas are habitable and which are not habitable to fish?
There's been extensive studies on that. There are maps, but not maybe official published one. But we have an existing actual, it's called a temperature model that simulates temperatures with flow operations through our section and San Francisco section of the watershed.
Okay, and my understanding is much of the northern watershed, particularly in the vicinity of Del Valle, is too warm to support fish.
The areas downstream of Lake Del Val are definitely a warm water habitat. There are no actual cold water releases from Lake Del Val, and the system through there, the river system is extremely augmented over the years. So it is a very warm system. As far as the rest of the watershed, though, as far as Upper Arroyo Mocho and those higher tributaries, we don't have data. It's all private land.
Okay. Unfortunately.
I guess I'll go next. So yes, I'm a little bit giddy. This is great. But first of all, before I jump into the fish ladder discussion, I think it's really important for our customers to understand that this project is not just to restore fish because some directors want fish in the creek, right? We as an agency implemented this project because we're trying to protect 40% of our water supply. If we did not start when we started down this path, we could have been in a position that we'd be in violation of Endangered Species Act and we couldn't take water out of the creek. During a drought, 40% of water, I do not know where we could get it in the state of California. So I think that's one of the most important things that we need to message, that we need to get to our customers is not, we're doing this for the fish. We're actually doing this for both the fish and our customers to ensure we have a reliable water supply. That message keep on getting lost, and I'm at fault doing that too when I talk to my neighbors and community members because I'm just so happy about the fish. So now that I get out there, I just want to say thank you. I decided to run for this board position precisely because of fishery restoration. This has always been something that's very important to me. I will say though, within the first 6 months in this position, I was educated on how difficult it is to have fish passage. I've been following this project. Staff did an amazing job throughout this project. We talk about the buy-up today. You guys did a tremendously wonderful job negotiating that buy-up. That buy-up is about as good as an agency could have hoped for. So thank you. It requires a lot of cooperation and communication with outside parties, with our local federal partners, with our NGOs. Throughout the process, all I have heard about our staff were compliments. Everybody is really complimentary of how ACWD is willing to be proactively out there saying, this is important to us, we'll take a lead. We will forge the path. So thank you for that. And thank you for all the departments. It really does take a village to get this project built. Off the top of my head, I actually cannot think of one department in this agency that did not touch this project one way or another. So thank you. All the department head, all the staff. I am just really, really happy that this finally happened and we actually seen fish use it. Yes, it's not a steelhead coming in, but one could always hope that Yomicus will come back as a steelhead. Fingers crossed, definitely look forward to seeing the data. And on the fun side note, I wonder can we use AI? I will defer to Director of Farm to identify the fish coming in and process data. With that, thank you very much for all your hard work. I look forward to seeing more data.
Definitely appreciate the update as well. We'll take into consideration what AI can do here. I think that's an interesting idea. Obviously, this is a project that's incredibly impressive and one that so many people in our community have taken a lot of interest in for many, many years, since well before I was on this board. So it's one of those updates where I wish we had more members of the public to listen in on this, but you know, we're making progress. We're seeing some success with the project, and so I'm very appreciative of all of the work that staff has put in to get us to this point, and hopefully, as we continue to make progress, we continue to see more fish come through the Fish Passage project. I think it'll be important for us to continue to highlight that for our community because it's one of the biggest expenses that we've had as a district, and so making sure that they continue to see why we made this investment and the tremendous progress that we're making the creek, I think will be important. So this is just a step in that process, of course, but very much appreciate all the work that's gone into it to get us to this point.
And I'll have you talk with Dr. Mers about how he is using artificial intelligence to improve the identification in viewing those sonar videos.
Yeah, I mean, it's a growing field, image recognition using AI. So I think it is a really, really interesting idea to see what we could do with that.
It's in the camera. We already have it. We just need to train it.
Yeah.
We're beginning that process.
I certainly enjoyed tonight's presentation this afternoon. When this first was built, one of my main concerns was, I mean, I've been on board for a long time, but one of my main concerns was if we build it, would they come? No, they can't. They cross. Now, granted, those are Chinooks that cross. Not necessarily, we don't know if an adult's gone through yet or not. I would love to know if one did, but you know what, we may not know because the flows are so high. The migration might not be over. As you said, there's no calendar. They don't have a little calendar that says, oh, hey, we're done. This has been a kind of a rare year. Every 4 years, every 10 years, depending on what levels you're looking at. One thing I would like to comment on is the temperature. I sat in on a conference session, an aqua conference several years ago. And I can't remember which university did the study, but they were looking at California fish and tolerance to higher temperatures. And yes, California fish have a higher tolerance to temperature. The problem is most of the data that is used and cited, this was their argument, was the flow rates are set for fish coming, I think it was off Klamath and way up by Oregon, and they should be setting flow rates to set to temperatures based on California. So I do believe there are fish up in the Alameda Creek, certainly not in the float, not in the float channel, maybe not, we don't know what's out there. I don't think anybody's ever really been out there trying to find out. There's large carp, we find them all the time. And I don't think we'll ever find a steelhead out there. Who knows? I mean, Dry Creek's been running for a long time. I hope they don't try to go up there because that gets pretty dry. But still, this project's been wonderful, but it also has been difficult. I appreciate everybody's efforts. Ms. Thomas said earlier, we're not done. We're starting another phase of this thing. And I think a fascinating phase. And I look forward to that phase. And I think also providing a lot of good information. They did come more than we expected. It worked. Thank you. Project required a lot of trust. That trust to work with the agencies. And I think it paid off. You never know. It could all blow up in our face. You know, you never know that. There are skeptics that say, oh, we shouldn't have done this. It's going to blow up in our face. You never know. But I think it worked. I think it was a valuable lesson for the district. We did it, succeeded. We deserve credit for it. Hopefully we will get credit for it. The staff deserves the credit. You guys did it. And thank you.
By the way, if anybody is interested, there's a pretty cool article in the New York Times today showing how AI works in real time, where the assignment was to write something similar to a scene from Shakespeare in one play. And they start at ground zero and it's all junk. And then they go all the way up to the 5,000th iteration of training, when it finally is producing something that is just exemplary. So I can understand what you're saying when we're just starting the AI training in this technology, and over time, hopefully it becomes a self-learning, self-fulfilling, useful tool. Again, good luck.
Thank you.
So we'll move on. We've got two more presentations to cut through and other business. How much time do you think it's going to take for the next two?
These next two items should go pretty quickly, as long as I refrain from bringing up Omicus GPT. So I think just a few minutes, we can probably get through these next two topics.
Yeah, our comments will be very brief.
Okay, good.
So this is just a quick touch point that we wanted to share. The board will recall in October, we had our very first workshop was on the climate adaptation plan draft report to the board. And so we're just here today to provide a quick handout and update to the board on what has been prepared for the public.
Thanks. So the board's aware we finished our climate adaptation last workshop. We saw the results of the study. Part of that project was to prepare what we called a public facing document, just a summary document. It's really just try to convey to the public that, yes, we're aware that climate change is happening. We do get those questions, actually more accusations. Yes, we're aware of it. We are studying what it's going to do to our long-term reliability and our planning, and we're trying to incorporate adaptation in today. So we're trying to be proactive about it. And so we wanted just to hand out a copy of this tonight. This is the public-facing document, public summary document. And public affairs team has been waiting for us to hand this out because they want to put it into circulation. And there's really not much more to share about that, other than it's just a high-level summary meant to be graphically communicative and provide information where to find out more. People are interested.
Great, thank you, Mr. Nizer. And we've included the full document as part of the slides of tonight's presentation, so folks would have access to it for today, but I believe there are future plans for putting that out there as well. So we don't have anything specific to present on this today, but just wanted to get it out there. And in case you had any brief questions, we're happy to answer.
Okay, quick question. We have an estimate on what our planning estimate of how high the sea level rise will be? You know, we had a consultant that suggested it would be 7 feet by 2100.
To be honest with you, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but we use the uniformly sort of accepted numbers that are developed in their report. And those are revised periodically.
Do you have any idea what that number might be?
Not off the top of my head, sorry.
I have one question. How did we arrive at the fact that since 1990, we have spent over 300 million on reliability investments? And do we have the documentation to back that up?
So that is a number that we prepared as part of a KUA white paper on investments in water supply reliability. And by the nature of those being integrated resources investments, they are by virtue adaptation measures in terms of our ability to handle drought and reductions in any of the other supplies. So that was a white paper we did, geez, I'm going to say about 10 years ago with KUA.
Okay, as long as you can back it up. Anything else on this subject?
Nothing else on that. Well,
Okay.
it's out there now. You're welcome to take a look and send us any other questions offline too, if you come up with more.
So the naming of the integrated resources planning document.
Thank you. So this is just another very brief touch point. We did bring up at the last workshop number 3, we opened up this discussion of a new name for the document. We heard some great initial feedback from the board, and we just wanted to, it was kind of thrown out there last time, so we just wanted to revisit today for any additional feedback on, you know, what we decide to name the document and any input that the board may have.
I had suggested the 2050 water plan, which would give someone reading the title an idea of what we were talking about.
I actually think we should run a district-wide contest to name this document. So I think our staff could be creative So can we consider the concept of running a district-wide contest sponsored by the district? And I will ask the general manager to think of some sort of reward and criteria for this competition.
Yeah, if that's something that the board is interested in doing, we can certainly do a program internally to see what great ideas are out there among staff.
No, I'll just add in support of that comment, because I know we discussed it very briefly in the LICA committee meeting about opening it up to staff and creating some kind of program for staff to contribute ideas. So I'd definitely be in favor of some kind of competition.
Yeah, this document is going to touch our staff's lives in the future, right? This is how this district is going to operate. So I think in some sense, it's only right for our staff to have a say.
And we love competition too. So I think we can craft something internally and then perhaps bring back the sort of higher scoring options to the board, something along those lines.
Wasn't here at the last meeting, but I did go through the presentation. I have long thought that the integrated resource planning document is kind of esoteric when viewed from a public standpoint. Somebody, regular citizen out in the community. And so if we're gonna have a contest, I'd like to make sure that we ask people to think about who the customer for this document is, and that it be relatable. I've been through many of these exercises in advertising and public relations on products, and so you want to keep it as simple as possible, like the 2050 ACWD water management plan, so that you easily communicate what subject you're on and what the benefit of reading this document is. Those are my thoughts.
And if I may chime in, I think that would be a great criteria to judge the contest by. And I'm also going to say that I would recommend that the director disqualify ourselves if we're going to do the final evaluation.
We're not gonna let you win, but you are gonna have to pick the one you like the best. I think that would be
As
appropriate.
long as we can be judges.
Okay. All right. Any last words, Ms.
I
Titus?
think we can take that feedback and give it some thought and come up with a concept.
So we'll move to item 6 on the agenda, general manager's reports.
Okay, just got a couple of items here. One is just as a reminder to the board, in May, we're going to be coming back to the board with any needed resolutions nominating any of you all who are interested in running for Aqua president or vice president. Those will be 2 seats that will be under an election that will be happening over the summer. And also any resolutions needed to nominate any of you all for the Aqua Region 5 board, the chair or the vice chair. So would like to know whether there's any interest from members of the board in running for any of those seats so that we can prepare for that for the May meeting. So we'll start with that. I have one other item after that.
Anybody, no one's interested in serving on the Region 5 board?
Well, Paul, you had taken a particular interest in Region 5 and gave them some direction with the Monterey trip.
I can't take on any.
Well, then if there's no other interest, I served on that for about 18 years and would be pleased to go back on.
Yeah, and I was not on the Region 5 board, and then I ended up doing most of the work. At the conference that was
So they need some
so
leadership.
it's a little unfair.
But if you wanted to go for it.
No, not me.
If there's other board members who want to get involved.
I would love to, but not at this time.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay, then I would put my name in, and I think you can run for all 3, can you?
I would expect you probably can, but I can confirm.
I'm gonna put in all three and see what happens.
So
Wait a minute, you want to run for what three?
Well, you get selected for one. If you're selected for president, then you make president. There's three different categories, check marks, and which positions do you want to
We're
run
talking
for?
about president or
Vice president, or no, not of Aqua. Talking about the president of Region 5, chair of Region 5, vice chair of Region 5, or board member of Region 5. The chair and vice chair of Region 5 serve on the board of directors of Aqua.
right, okay, so I'm hearing interest from one and interest in potentially throwing your hat in for all three. So we'll take a look at specifically what would be required to do that, and so we'll be ready for the May board meeting. I'm not hearing any interest in running for the larger Aqua organization on the board. Just kind of looking around, making sure. Okay, the one other related item is to confirm who from our board would like to cast our vote for the Aqua board elections, Aqua officer elections, and the Region 5 elections. Normally, I think it would be President Sethy, but I think you've indicated that you want to ensure that there's opportunities for others too. Am I right?
If anyone wishes to take on this duty, I would be more than happy to hand it off.
Refer to your leadership. The glory.
Okay. It doesn't take much effort to fill out the ballots, so I think I can.
I'm open to it, but I'll defer to.
Yeah, if you want to take on the duty, please.
Sure, why not?
Okay,
I'll just look to you, Mr. Stevenson, to kind of walk me through.
No
what I'll
problem.
need to.
it's actually easier now than ever because it's an electronic system that spans several weeks. So you don't have to be there at a very specific time during the conference and any of that sort of thing. You pick the right one to go for. The reason I ask is we need to make sure that we're prepared for an item in May to designate you as our
Okay.
voter.
So just a couple of tips, make sure you vote for the right person on our board. And number two, we might want to, when is the deadline for that? Wasn't it in June or something?
Yeah, June 11th, something like that.
I think as we go to Aqua next month, we're going to become familiar with some of the other candidates that are running. We're trying to position themselves for Aqua president, vice president, and then the regional board. I'm familiar with some. And our good friend, Ernie Avila, the president of the Contra Costa Water District Board, is running for vice president. Just to get folks aware of that.
Okay. All right. We do have one last general manager's report by our Director of Engineering and Technology, Mr. Huang.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening again, board members, staff and community members. I just wanted to inform the board, we have a public meeting coming up for the Alameda Reservoir replacement construction project. The meeting is going to be a Zoom virtual meeting on Thursday, May 4th, 2023 at 6 p.m. Will be via Zoom. The purpose of the meeting obviously is to inform the public about the upcoming project and elements of the project, the purpose, need, and scope of the project, as well as what residents should be aware of and look out for, and how to contact us if they have any questions or concerns. If you recall, the board approved the construction contract last month, so we are ready to start construction in May. And I just thought I would inform the board about this upcoming event.
I have a question about that. They say it's a virtual meeting.
Yes, sir.
If more than 3 or more board members, would that have to be a published meeting? And the
Yes.
date again is
May 4th.
May 4th.
At 6 p.m.
I will not be attending. I will be up at Mount Shasta, staying in Weed, California.
So we will notice that meeting as a potential special meeting of the board. We'll follow the rules required to run the meeting as a board meeting should more than 2 directors want to participate. Sounds like we have interest from at least one. We'll be sure we're ready in any event.
Yes. So May 4th at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Any other? reports?
That's all.
Okay. So, any director's comments? Agenda requests?
Just a reminder before we move on, thank you. Yeah, so we just need to be careful of AB 2449 and the requirements of that.
That's a great point.
If directors are going to participate virtually, so we might want to huddle on that.
Right, so please be thinking about that and let me know if you plan to attend. And then we'll work with the proper rules.
It's coming up right around the corner. It's next week.
And under 249, each board member does it once every 6 months. So twice a year.
Just a reminder, for a virtual meeting, you either need to participate under the old teleconferencing rules, right? Where we would need to put the teleconference location on the agenda. And if you were going to participate under 2449, you would need to either qualify under the just cause basis or the, I can't remember the other one, emergency circumstances basis. And so we would just need to coordinate with your general manager and me to be sure that you qualify under AB 2449. Just because it's a virtual meeting.
Yes, I think AB 2449 might not have contemplated the concept of virtual only meetings as a regular thing, so it may be somewhat complicated.
Yeah, but we can work with it. You may have to post notice at your location and so forth and so on. But so if you're interested, please let me know or let Pat and I both know. We'll make sure it works.
I'm going to be busy. It's a pleasure trip, not business. So I don't see any other director's requests or agenda items. I will turn it over to item number 8, our closed door session, and I ask our general counsel to lead us into this topic.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and it's 6:52, and Director Gunther has a conflict, so he will not be participating in the closed session. And then the board is going to convene in a closed session pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9 subsection B2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, 1 potential case. We can now convene into closed session.
Okay, it's recording is back on, and we'll turn it back to our general counsel to close up here.
Great, thank you, President Sethy. The board convened in closed session pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9 subsection D2. Conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, 1 potential case. No action was taken in the closed session, and just for the record, Director Gunther did not participate because he has a conflict. That concludes the report.
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Are there any last minute comments? Water stories? Okay, so with that, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.